Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Katarina. I'm from Slovakia, and I have a quiz for you. So please do take out your cell phones, and yes, it's allowed now. Go to the section Interactive, and let's see what's your knowledge about the problems that we face as researchers in order to overcome disinformation. So the first things that we have to overcome in our work are public perceptions. So my first question to you is, on average, how many Central Europeans think that NATO and US-led coalitions supported terrorists in Syria? It's A, 22%, B, 26%, C, 31%, or D, 40%. What do you think? This is actually one of the questions that we polled back in 2018. We do our own polling, Globsec Trends, in order to find out how widespread is disinformation in Central Europe. And we found out that a lot of Central Europeans believe in conspiracy theories. You know, 53% of Slovaks believe in conspiracy theory that there are totalitarian, secret societies aiming to establish a totalitarian world order. But then we get a lot of data on the perceptions of threat. And this year we found out there are huge differences about the perception of threats among the Central Europeans. So, for example, there are 41% of Slovaks who think that United States pose a threat to their national security, in comparison to only 12% of Poles who think similarly. But let's go back to your polling and see how did you vote it. Okay, so majority of the people voted for D, and actually, that's not correct answer. On average, it's just 26%. But actually, 40% of Slovaks, which is D, think that NATO and US-led coalition supports terrorism in Syria. So these kind of conspiracy theories and disinformations are very widespread about NATO in Central Europe. Okay, so let's go to our next question. How many websites have been identified by a group of independent researchers as spreading malign, disinformative, and conspiratorial content in Slovakia and Czech Republic? It's A, 118, B, 150, C, 162, or D, 180 websites. What do you think? I mean, we are a country of 5 million, and we're unique in the sense that we have a website that collects list and provides a list of disinformation websites. It's called conspiratori.sk. It's a project of PR agencies, and they basically rank any kind of website. It doesn't have to be disinformative or informative on the scale of 0 to 10. And if a website scores number 5 or over 5, they're considered to be spreading malign or disinformation content. So what are your results? Let's see, how did you vote it? Yes, correctly. There are 162 disinformation websites being listed in this database at the moment. And unfortunately, the numbers are rising, constantly rising. Okay, so next questions. In February 2017, a video of the transfer of military convoy of Allied forces through eastern part of Slovakia was spread with the disinformation narrative of preparation of NATO's invasion. How many people do you think saw this video within 24 hours? Was it 150,000, 575,000, 935,000, or over 1.3 million? It's 5 million country, it's 2017, so not a lot of bots and trolls, but we see a lot of disinformation being spread, especially when there's a NATO convoy passing Slovakia. So what do you think? Okay, let's see how you voted. Okay. Can we have the slide about the voting? Nobody voted? Almost. It was only 935,000, but it was 3 times as much as usually the Slovak video bloggers get when they post a video. So it became very viral and was pushed by those over 100 disinformation websites. Okay, next question. What is the ratio between the budget European Union set for detection of disinformation and the budget of the Russian state-sponsored media allocated for 2020? It's 1 to 6, 1 to 60, 1 to 160, or 1 to 260. As we know, I know I'm speaking a lot about Russians, but in my region, in Central region, it's predominantly Russian disinformation. I mean, China was mentioned several times in here, but still in Central Europe, it's predominantly Russian disinformation that is spread by a lot of disinformation websites or actors. Okay, let's see the results. It's not correct. The correct answer is 1 to 260. 260. I mean, in the next slide, you're going to see where some of the money is being allocated. In real time, it's 5 million to 1.3 billion euros. So yeah, it's 1.2, its ratio is 1 to 260. Okay, next question is going to be on online advertisement. According to the Global Disinformation Index study, what was the value of advertisements that were posted on 20,000 disinformation websites? Was it 150 million, 235 million, 300 million, or 325 million that were posted in 1 year on these 20,000 disinformation websites? What do you think? Monetary incentives are very, attractive for various actors to spread disinformation, and it's a good business eventually. Yes, well, yeah, you guys have the correct answer. Almost $250 million worth ads was posted on disinformation websites. So a lot of money is making a lot of actors is making a lot of money on disinformation. But the good thing is that there are lots of good practices that we can share among each other. There are lots of good practices how we have been countering disinformation and hybrid threats, and we need to share them because we are NATO and we are stronger together. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to yield the floor to my colleague, Jakub, who's going to be ready with a different presentation and different quiz.
Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome to the stage the Digital Forensic Research Lab's Senior Fellow at Atlantic Council, Jakub Kalenski.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Jakub Kalenski, and I work for the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, where we focus on identifying, exposing, and explaining hostile information manipulation, and we do it by using open source data. Within this very short time frame, I can't really describe everything that we're doing with the Atlantic Council on exposing disinformation, so I have one very, very short case study. You have a model situation: Russia denies something. In this case, they denied that their military contingents would be present in Venezuela. The speculations that Russians are in Venezuela have been there already last year, but it was only in March when we received some pictures which were supposedly proving that they are there. Now, how do you verify that they are there? First, you can rely on the experts. You can consult one of the most knowledgeable accounts on Twitter, which is Darth Putin KGB, who tells you do not believe anything until the Kremlin denies it. Kremlin has denied that the Russians are in Venezuela, so it must be true. And you would be right, but there is a more reliable, although a bit longer way. That's what we are doing. And in this case, we actually used the technique of geolocation. So we took the picture and compared it to Google Maps. On the left, you see the picture from the internet, and on the right, you see Google Maps. And as you can see, we highlighted the pole in the green, the fence in the yellow, the parking slot for the cars in the blue, and the red roofed building in the red. And then there are some more pictures of exactly this plane and the soldiers there. And as you can see in detailed pictures, they are wearing desert camouflage, meaning they were probably flown directly from Syria. So we were able not to locate them only on one specific airport, But we were actually able to locate the Russian soldiers at exactly one hotel in Venezuela. Please mark the columns and the semicircular roof above the columns. Here you could actually see it on a bigger picture. The columns, the brown umbrellas, and the semicircular roof, very distinctive shape. And you can see this very distinctive shape at exactly one hotel in Venezuela. So on the left, you would see the picture from Google Earth, and it is this hotel, Hotel Círculo Militar in Fortuna. One more quick example. This is Legacy Strategic Services. This is a private military company, quite similar to the better-known Wagner Group that is run by so-called Putin's chef, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And we were trying to trace where this private military company is located in Syria. Again, we worked with pictures acquired via social media, and there you can see that the comment said that we should be looking in the proximity of Aleppo. And there is actually just one area near Aleppo with the exact location of the fenced area and those two buildings and the road there. Now, in more detail, you see the bigger building highlighted in the blue, the smaller building highlighted in the green, and you can see the road on the left. And it's exactly this area that you can see on the map near Aleppo. One more picture, here you can see the road better. It is exactly the location of the buildings and of the road. Now, further digging through open source data can actually reveal some more surprising information. So we looked up the address of Legacy Strategic Services, and then we were looking for people who actually who are on the social media admitting that they work for this company. And we have found this gentleman called Anatoly Smolin, the director of Legacy Strategic Services. And I think you wouldn't guess where he looks for the recruits for his private military company. It is a dating website. Find Your Ukrainian Beauty. So he was looking for recruits at this website, but apparently he was quite successful. He has found some beauties, and there you can see him on the picture in Syria conducting a training for the local Syrian fighters. So as you can see, working with open source data might be a bit of fun and might be a bit of surprising, but the main reason we are doing it is actually to protect the facts against those who are trying to undermine them, and thus to protect democracy and its institutions. So if you like this work, please follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our newsletter, read it and share it with your audiences, and help us do our work. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome to the stage Director of the Global Focus Center, Oana Popescu-Zamathea.
Good evening, everyone. And as I gather from your previous questions, this is the session that you've all been waiting for. Because a lot of the questions have been about disinformation and interference. And I think the reason this session is particularly relevant is that we're all here today looking at the alliance, NATO, founded to counter, to prevent conventional, unconventional threats, and to essentially protect us against conflict, war. But the thing is, much of what we'll be facing in the future, in the very near future, is not going to be called conflict, it's not going to be called war, and very likely it's going to not necessarily come from our enemies, but it's going to come from within. It's going to use our own populations against us, it's going to use our own governments against us, and very often we're not even going to be aware that this happens. I have here today Mr. Rand Waltzman, Deputy Chief Technology Officer and Senior Information Scientist from Rand Corporation. and Carl Miller, research director of the Center for the Analysis of Social Media at Demos, trying to sort this out for you. And I think, you know, what I'm going to start with, just asking you, gentlemen, to perhaps focus your remarks on, your initial remarks, is these threats, whatever we call them, that we're being faced with, they're not necessarily manufacturing. It's not about manufacturing problems. It's not about somebody creating problems for us. It's just about somebody using problems that we have already and that we have created. So maybe if you can focus some of your initial remarks on the question, well, how is an alliance that was founded and conceived to defend us against our enemies going to do a good job in defending us against ourselves? So please, if any of you wants to take this up, I'll be very happy to hear.
All right, well, let me begin then. Well, firstly, hello everyone, thank you so much for having me here. The good news is that if NATO doesn't do something about this, then we truly are lost. This is the alliance which desperately needs to step into this problem. I'll begin, I'll deal with your point, but let me begin just by stepping back. So over the last 10 years or so, several things have happened which have all come together. Firstly, information has become so much more central. So data, information, the idea, you know, it's changed almost every different social and economic part of life that we can imagine. And it also has kind of been brought into the heart of what militaries think warfare is as well. So information has always been used in war. It's always been an important part of conflict. But I would say over the last 10 years, something else has happened. And this is point number one. Militaries have kind of made this conceptual flip. And rather than see information as a tool of war, it's seen information as a space which war happens within, as a domain of war, which is alongside air, sea, land, and space, and so on. So it's a domain, a conflict area. So militaries around the world, both liberal, democratic, and autocratic, have all pivoted to begin to fight and indeed win in this new domain. I think that is one of the first and most important things that's happened. Secondly, just as militaries were doing this anyway, we saw the rise of these new online social spaces which were open, they were anonymous, they were frictionless, and they were the new battlegrounds where we were all fighting our various political and electoral races, of course, social media. Easy for anyone to join, where no one knows who anyone else is, easy to game, easy to be reverse engineered, and where people are increasingly turning to in order to learn more and more about social and political life. Right now in the UK, of course, as we near our own election, we have the politicians desperately fighting on social media spaces just as they're out there on the street. And those two things then came together. So just as militaries were pivoting to understand their new role in a world where war was being fought within information, just as online spaces were rising, we saw the rise of what I would call dark influence, for want of a better word. Sometimes it was coordinated inauthentic networks, sometimes it was fake accounts, sometimes it was the amplification of mainstream news stories, sometimes it was really targeted campaigns. This was when militaries began to reach through these online spaces in order to have various kinds of attitudinal or behavioral effects in countries around the world as an extension of their own geopolitical strategies. Now, this wasn't necessarily fake news. It wasn't necessarily even disinformation. Like, more often than not, this was about cherry-picking perfectly true stories to create a very distorted picture of the world and making people angry about things that they already believe. It wasn't necessarily about lying to people, but it was about changing what they thought and what they saw. And then, so over the last 10 years, we've seen this break out in almost every single election and major political and social event that has happened all over the world. Now, sometimes that spotlight shines on the US election, sometimes it shines in the UK, but it's a hell of a lot worse if you're in Georgia or Estonia, and it's happening not just on Twitter and Facebook, but on pretty much every online platform that you can imagine. It's happening, I mean, we did an investigation to expose it happening on Wikipedia, it's happening on SoundCloud, it's happening on WhatsApp, it's happening on TikTok, happening almost everywhere online. And then lastly, if I have enough time, then, as we saw this new kind of conflict break out, we're now facing this situation where it's a kind of warfare which increasingly we feel is gripping our own societies, and we have no idea what to do about it. The tech giants and civic society are talking more about digital literacy, which by itself really won't work. Governments aren't really even able, I think, to define this problem, and everywhere we're scratching our heads because offense is so much easier to do than defense. We haven't even begun to talk about de-escalation of information warfare. We haven't even really understood what can be effective in countering the existence of these campaigns.
Carl, thank you very much. And before I turn to the next speaker, I just want to make two very brief notes about what you just said. One, you know, we actually did 2 studies at the Global Focus Center focusing on this demand side, on what we don't do enough that would prepare us for resisting malign interference. And the studies were in the Western Balkans and the Black Sea region. And one of the major findings was that members of NATO had very, very similar weaknesses with non-members of NATO. So, you know, and I throw this question to you, turning back to the role of the alliance. Then what good is it? I mean, are we actually protected? Does NATO protect us from malign interference as well? Is this something, is this a purpose it can serve?
Well, at the moment, I would say nobody is protecting us. I mean, the governments of Europe and the United States have decided to leave their populations essentially undefended at this point, as far as I can tell. There are many reasons for that we could go into, but at some point you have to stop admiring the problem and actually start doing something about it. And so far, we've gotten to the point where people are at least willing to listen to what the problem is, but I don't think we've gotten to the point that people are actually willing to take any actual positive action. And the point about the action is that this is the kind of thing which you cannot solve in a passive way. This requires proactive type activities. So you have to actively message people, you have to actively, you can't, for example, so you can't counter disinformation really, you have to displace it. And in order to displace it, I mean, this is just the way people's minds work. In order to displace it, you have to provide something to displace it with. So one of the problems that we face is who is actually going to decide what narratives you would like to be out there as opposed to the ones that you don't like to be out there. It isn't enough to just say, this is a bad narrative. You have to say what you would like to be and make sure that you somehow get that out there. And that requires action. So building up resilience is also a question of being proactive and putting out narratives. And then offensive is also putting out narratives, being proactive. So in both cases, building resilience and in offense, you have to be active.
But is this something for governments to do? Is this something for nation states to do? Does this require a supranational, international response? And, you know, last of all, especially when you look at countries in Central Eastern Europe, do we feel safe for our governments to address this? Because again, going back to the studies that we did, very often the governments are actually part of the problem, not of the solution. So do we trust them to actually do anything good about this?
I mean, I think we need a new kind of informational mutual defense clause. I mean, I think the problem, the gap, is that our kind of legal and international architecture has not kept up with the threats that populations face. I think it's pretty much as simple as that. So, you know, states are now kind of interfering and extending geopolitical influence in ways which none of our mutual defense anythings are actually defining or therefore allowing us to collectively counter. Now, you're absolutely right. Like, governments and political parties and heads of state are also doing a huge amount of this too. Like, that's part of the problem. But civic society cannot tackle this alone, and they are basically being the only part of society which is actually mobilized to actually try and deal with this.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, it cannot do that alone. But I'm looking at protests from Hong Kong to Lebanon to Chile to Europe. And the thing is, clearly, political parties have probably lost their power of representation, and institutions of representative democracy have not kept up with the social changes. So can they actually address this problem within the framework of representative democracy? Or do we risk that just like people go out into the street, they will go out on social media, they will go out and trust people in churches, in all sorts of congregations, and they will not trust the institutions of representative democracy?
Well, the institutions have to build up trust. So you have to establish trust somehow. If you don't do that, then you can't really do much of anything. So,
but we are at an all-time low. trust in institutions.
Well, but the question is how much effort has really been put into building up trust?
Okay.
And so I would posit that really not much effort has been put into that.
But I mean, look, the current kind of solution toolkit that we currently talk about is unbelievably narrow. I mean, people basically either dwell on digital literacy training, which will reach people in formal education and might have some...
Is this an illusion? Is this...
Yeah. I mean,
are we entertaining the illusion that if we inform people and educate them, they will be bright and smart resist this themselves?
It's the fuzzy, warm solution which doesn't tangle with any of the, arrangements and divisions of power which we currently have. The tech giants love it, and it might have some effect in 10 years' time of the people that have gone through it. But it's clearly going to be inadequate until then. So it's either that, or the other thing that people talk about is like direct governmental intervention at the content level into online platforms.
Ooh.
So, well, right.
I mean, that's
right. Which
I already feel like leaving.
Which is offensive to Liberal Democrats for an entirely understandable and completely different reason. Now, the one thing that we don't ever talk about when it comes to trying to solve online kind of information warfare or illicit influence is platform engineering. We never talk about platform engineering. So the reason, like Facebook and Twitter and all these platforms are designed largely to do one thing, which is to grow as large as possible. And that means growth within the tech giants has been the most dominant, most powerful team that you can imagine. What growth wants to happen within those platforms basically has happened over the last 10 years. And that means that all online platforms that we use basically share one characteristic, which is frictionlessness. It's very, very easy to join. They're very easy to do stuff on. And you volunteer very little information to do with your identity or anything else when you do stuff on there. And that's all because they're designed to grow. Now, we might, as a society, at some point, come to a decision that platforms which are central to our social and political lives aren't best served by platforms that are also designed to grow as large as possible.
Except also, I will interrupt you because one, we like comfort. As consumers, as people, we like comfort, so we will go for whatever is easy. And then the other thing is democracy itself is a slow-moving animal, okay? I mean, democracy does not offer the same kind of smooth, frictionless process, and that's perhaps the beauty of it. So before starting taking questions from the audience, I will just ask you, is building resilience enough? Is it enough to strengthen ourselves so that we would be more resilient? Or do we also need a form of response? Do we need to clearly identify who's doing this to us and try to target those individuals or entities?
Well, at the end of the day, I think the best thing is to build resilience. That's where you're going to be strongest. Because if the population is sufficiently resilient, then these kind of efforts by at least foreign influence can be resisted. The problem is that you have equal amounts of influence, maybe even worse, by domestic operators. Mm-hmm. So I would say, for example, in most countries, domestic operations by domestic operators are a much bigger problem or a bigger threat than by foreign influence. Mm-hmm. So somehow you have to get that under control.
Well, because we have 6 minutes and a half, I'm going to take questions from the audience. I'm going to take 3 at once, and please speak in tweets. Over there, on the right-hand side first, there's a lady.
Hi, I'm a behavioral economist working in international security from the Institute for European Studies and Women in International Security. So you talked about building resilience. What does building resilience actually look like? Because when we're talking about increasing defense spending and specifically NATO being agile and active in the digital age, what can we actually do to build resilience and combat, not counter, disinformation campaigns?
Okay, so how do we build resilience? Let's take a second question as well. Here, just in front.
Boris Ruger, Munich Security Conference. Rand, you spoke about internal actors, but isn't that a false dichotomy? We have internal actors, but we have external actors who are amplifying those messages that are so divisive. So how can you draw a line between those and say those are two separate categories completely?
So how do we differentiate? And then we have a third question just behind you. Please put up your hand.
Hello, it's Razin here again, founder of Hydroco, focused on biotechnology and AI. So my question was that, like, you guys are talking about, disinformation and everything, but how do we adopt a Bayesian way of thinking to basically identify the signal from the noise? So, like, probably to incorporate a probabilistic way of thinking, would that be the case? And how do you incorporate that as an innate instinct within the demographic? Thank you.
Okay, so since I asked for the questions to be delivered in tweets, please answer in tweets as well.
Well, so first to your question, I don't actually draw a hard distinction, because you could have domestic operations which are supported by foreign influence, who the domestic operations have to serve their interests. You could have foreign originated operations, which I think is much actually of less consequence probably, but yes, so you can't really separate those out. But if you're going to get at those kinds of things, you have to get at the domestic operators, because if the domestic operators weren't taking action, then the foreign, where they're going to play off of? There wouldn't be anything there. So it's still, you still have to focus on the domestic operations.
I think there was also the question about how do you build resilience, because
so,
you said it was
yeah, so building resilience has to do with proactively putting out strong narratives that you find that are favorable to the society. So if you put out strong narratives, I mean, people are, cognitive psychology makes people resistant to changing narratives. So if you have strong narratives to start with, it's difficult to change them. And the stronger they are, the harder it is to change, and that translates into resilience. But in order to do that, you have to first decide what narratives you want to put out there, and then you have to actually put them out.
Okay.
This is an area where me and my colleague here probably massively disagree. I simply don't think this is a problem of counter-narratives. We're dealing with platforms that want to serve you up the most engaging content possible to keep you on their platform. Now, what kind of content is that likely to be? It's content which will make you really angry about stuff, or it's stuff which is really funny. Basically, it's usually one of those two things. Now, outrage is the easiest way to manipulate people. You will share whatever makes you outraged across social media like it's going out of fashion. You will react to that in ways you don't react to almost any other content. And that's why on campaign after campaign that we pull apart, day in, day out, outrage is the one consistent factor.
So what do we do about it?
You change platform engineering. Like the reason that these things, I mean, partly this is to do with who we are as human beings. There's nothing we can do to change that. But we don't want these platforms to essentially echo our own cognitive psychological defects in the decisions that they make about what information to surround us with.
And can we genuinely stand in the way of technological advancement and the people's preferences? I mean, we're going to do that. Aren't we going to be faced with a new challenge and a new challenge?
These aren't people's preferences. These are commercial decisions which companies have made around how their platforms work in order to get bigger. These are not people's preferences at all. And the idea that we can't implement kind of democratic values into the platforms which have become central to our societies, I think is probably one of the most dangerous ones, which is currently washing around the policy debates on this.
Okay.
Well, so actually another thing that you can do, which I think would be a reasonable idea, is to create a sort of take NATO, for example, to create a national public or international public social media platform, where you then have complete transparency, you have complete control, and then you can, and not only that, but everybody can contribute to solutions equally. Because right now with the platforms, for example, they're businesses, and whatever they say they're doing, you don't actually know that they're doing anything that they say because they won't actually show you. So, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is not an elected public official, and looking to him to solve the problem, I think, is a big mistake. Right? If you want to solve the problem, then you do something like we did with CERN. In CERN, right, people got together, all countries got together, contributed money, and built an accelerator. Okay? You do the same thing. Everybody get together, you build a public social media platform which provides all the transparency and all the information that you need.
Because just before you intervene, because it's fashionable, can I see a show of hands of how many of you actually believe technology is your ally, our ally, in dealing with malign interference, and how many believe it's an enemy? So first of all, how many believe it's your ally in fighting malign interference? Okay, wow, that sounds overwhelming. And your enemy? Technology is your enemy. Okay, that's quite hopeful.
Well, no, it's both.
So,
it is both, you're right.
Very last words, because we have 20 seconds.
So society, partly as a result of these influence campaigns, we think, or anyway, societies are becoming angrier, they're becoming more split, they're becoming more paralyzed. That's why we've done nothing about it here in the UK. Countries are becoming further apart. International cooperation is becoming more difficult. This is clearly something which cannot be dealt with on a nation-state per nation-state basis. NATO is, and this is the reason it's so important to talk about this in front of you all, NATO is one of the few institutions left that is the glue between nation-states around the world which allows that kind of cooperation to happen. So if NATO cannot step in to help us deal with disinformation, we are going to have a very, very rocky next 10 years.
So a trans-border problem, trans-border solutions. Rand, would you agree or add anything to this?
To what?
So it's a trans-border problem which requires trans-border solutions.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Nobody can solve this by themselves. Within one country, it can't be a civilian or it can't be a government thing alone or an industrial thing alone. Globally, it can't be one country alone. It has to be trans-border, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I think this was probably the fastest paced session. And I hope you got at least part of the answers that you were looking for.